Today we're going way back to ancient East Africa to discover the story of Koogere,
Kogere,
Queen of Busongora.
Queen of Busongora. You got it.
Great.
We're going to be using excerpts from a book called Kitara, A Glimpse into Ancient East Africa by Melody Hope.
Okay.
And it's a really interesting book because it talks about this time period in East Africa long before European influence, right?
Now, just a heads up, this isn't your average queen. She was a religious leader, she was a power broker, and she may have had an influence.
Yeah, and she may have had an influence that'll surprise you.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, it all starts with her name, Kogere, which means the cleansed one. But this name has deep ties to the mysterious Cwezi cult, which played a huge role in shaping her destiny and the fate of a whole kingdom. Yeah. But, okay, so we've got this cult, this Cwezi cult.
Yeah.
And then we've got Kogere, but, how does she fit into all of this?
So Kogere, she was also known as Koogere or Kogelo, which means the cleansed one.
Okay.
And that name, it directly ties into one of the cult's rituals, this ritual of water immersion.
Okay.
And this is really interesting because this practice could actually be linked to the biblical concept of baptism.
Oh, wow.
Maybe knowledge of baptism had been passed down through ancient Ethiopian traditions or something.
That's fascinating.
And Kogere was a really shrewd operator. She might have adapted it to her advantage.
Wow. So she's using existing beliefs to solidify her power.
Exactly.
So, can you tell us a little bit about that? What did Melody Hope reveal about this cult and how it shaped the kingdom of Kitara?
So Kitara was this really vast kingdom.
Okay.
It stretched across a huge part of what we now know as Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania.
Wow.
And the Cwezi cult, it was really embedded in the fabric of the kingdom. It was everywhere. It was all about divination.
Okay.
So predicting the future through rituals and interpretations and stuff.
Interesting.
But it also enforced this really, really rigid caste system.
Okay.
So just try to imagine a society where pastoralists, like the cattle herders,
right,
they were considered superior to the native cultivators.
Wow.
And get this belief in their superiority. It was even linked to physical differences.
Oh, wow. So they were using physical traits to justify social hierarchy.
Exactly. And unfortunately, as we know, that's a theme that we see pop up throughout history over and over again.
The pastoralists, they were often taller and leaner, while the cultivators tended to be shorter and stockier.
Right, right.
And these differences were then used to reinforce this whole idea of pastoral superiority, like some sort of divine decree, justifying their place at the top.
It's kind of scary how easily beliefs, even ones that claim divine origin, can be twisted to control and exploit other people. And we're talking about all this happening centuries before.
Centuries before
any European influence.
Exactly. This is pre-colonial East Africa.
So a totally different world with different values.
A different understanding of power.
Yeah.
And within this world, Kogere's story starts to unfold alongside the rise of a very powerful king, her brother, Ruta Hinduka Nganzaki.
Okay, hold on. Ruta Hinduka Nganzaki.
That's
a lot. Can you give us some context before we go any further? Who was this Nganzaki, and what kind of a leader was he?
So Nganzaki was the Mukama, essentially the king of this huge and powerful kingdom called Kitara.
Okay.
Even his name, Ruta Hinduka, means he who does not turn, which hints at his dominance.
Okay.
Legend has it that he had so much wealth in cattle that whenever anyone offered him more, he'd just say, Nganzaki, meaning, what lack have I?
Ha. That's
I know, right? Talk about a power move.
Yeah, definitely a power move.
A power move, yeah.
Okay, so Nganzaki, he was the Mukama, the king of Kitara, and his wealth was legendary.
Okay. And I have to remind everybody, we're not talking about gold or diamonds here.
No.
In Kitara wealth, it was measured in cattle.
Yes, cattle were everything.
Okay.
And Nganzaki had herds that just stretched as far as the eye could see.
Wow. So he had seemingly everything.
Yeah.
But he recognizes Kogere's abilities.
He did.
And he appoints her as chief of Busongora.
Yes.
Which is an area known for its incredible beauty.
It's stunning.
For those of you trying to picture this, imagine the area around what is now Queen Elizabeth National Park.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, wasn't this a patriarchal society?
It was very much so.
How did a woman rise to such a high position?
Yeah, so you're right. Leadership roles, they were typically reserved for men.
Right.
But Koogere, she was the eldest sister.
Okay.
And on top of that, she had this mastery of what they called wizardry.
Wizardry.
So her ability to influence the unseen forces.
Okay.
And in a society that really believed in divination and spiritual power.
Right.
That gave her a lot of leverage.
So she's got the backing of the king.
Yeah.
She's got a powerful position.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got this aura of like spiritual authority.
Yes.
So what does she do with all of this? Did she just like settle into a quiet life overseeing Busongora?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Koogere, she establishes herself in a palace overlooking this beautiful landscape.
Okay.
And she starts amassing her own herds of cattle,
Okay.
which were second in size only to the king's.
Wow.
It even says that her herd disrupted travel for days when they moved to the watering hole.
Wow. I'm trying to picture the logistics of moving that many cattle.
I know, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah. That suggests a complex social structure, skilled herders, control over vital grazing lands and water sources.
You got it.
This wasn't just about personal wealth.
Right.
It was economic and potentially even political power.
So she wasn't just some rich lady hanging out with cows.
Clearly not.
This brings us to her role as chief of Busongora,
Mm-hmm.
a region in present-day Uganda.
Okay.
Now, for a woman to hold this kind of position back then
Yeah.
was practically unheard of.
But, this was also a pretty brutal time.
Oh, absolutely.
How did she navigate the realities of power in that era?
Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah.
The sanctity of human life wasn't really a given.
Right.
Power and spiritual influence often overshadowed compassion back then.
Yeah. So you have to remember that this was long before Christianity arrived in the region.
Mm.
Their worldview is totally different. The idea of the sanctity of life as we understand it today just
Right.
wasn't part of it.
Okay, yeah, that really paints a picture of how different things were back then. So how did she actually govern? Did she follow her brother's lead, or did she forge her own path?
Let's just say Koogere wasn't afraid to use whatever tools she had. Imagine her, this cleansed one, using fear and those mystical beliefs of the Cwezi to control people. There are even accounts that say that she established a cult of maidservants to extend her influence even further.
Oh, wow.
Which, by the way, is strikingly similar to the modern-day Arborangi cult.
Wait, so you're saying there could be a connection between Kogere's reign and a cult that still exists today?
It's possible.
That's wild. What does that tell us about the lasting impact of her leadership?
It really does make you think about how beliefs and practices can survive for centuries.
Yeah.
But this is really just the beginning. Kogere's story takes some pretty unexpected turns, especially when a new rebellious leader emerges and shakes things up.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. I'm definitely sensing a but here.
Yeah.
It sounds like Koogere had a pretty firm grip on power, but as we know, power can be fleeting. So who was this rebellious leader that challenged her?
This is where it gets interesting. Unganzaki, the seemingly untouchable king, eventually dies and leaves the throne to his son, Isarzar. Now picture this. A young, rebellious prince, more interested in hunting and partying than ruling.
That sounds like a recipe for trouble. Did Isarzar try to get rid of the Cwezi that his aunt had created?
You got it. Isarzar wasn't interested in following tradition at all. He clashed with the elders, banished some from the palace, and replaced them with his friends. Basically, he flipped the whole system on its head. And remember those counties we talked about earlier? He divided the kingdom into these administrative regions and appointed his sister, Nyangoma, as chief of Buruuli. It was a very strategically important area along the Nile.
So he's not just challenging the old guard, but he's also empowering his sister,
Yeah,
potentially creating another power player in the game.
exactly.
How did Koogere react to all of this?
Let's just say she wasn't thrilled. But remember, Koogere was a master manipulator. Even while Isarzar was trying to assert his authority, she managed to hold on to some influence. And in a twist, she even converted Isarzar's sister, Nyangoma, to her side.
Wow. Okay, so now we have two powerful women, an aunt and a niece,
Yeah.
working together while this young king tries to shake things up. She brought Nyangoma into the fold, and together they continued to exert their influence over the kingdom.
Wow. So even with this, less than cooperative king, they were able to still kind of pull the strings.
Yeah, they were a force to be reckoned with, and this really shows you how far their influence spread.
Well,
Even centuries later, we see echoes of their power.
really?
Hope mentions a village in Kenya named Kogelo Nyangoma,
Oh.
which has a connection to Barack Obama's ancestry.
Okay, wait. So there's a village named after Koogere Nyangoma that exists to this day.
To this day.
And it's even linked to a modern-day U.S. president. Wow. But Isarzar's reign couldn't have lasted forever, right?
Right.
What led to his downfall?
Well, his decisions ultimately led to his own downfall.
Okay.
And what happened next is like a pivotal moment in Kitara's history.
Okay.
A palace gateman named Bukuku.
A gate man.
Yes, a gateman. He seized power, declared himself the new Mukama.
Wait, hold on, a gate man.
Yeah.
How did someone in such a seemingly low-ranking position
I know, it's surprising.
overthrow a king?
But it seems like Azar's actions created this power vacuum
Right.
that Bukuku maybe unexpectedly stepped into.
So right place, right time.
Right place, right time.
But what makes Bukuku's rise even more significant
Yeah.
is that he was the first non-pastoralist to rule Kitara.
Exactly.
So remember that rigid caste system we talked about? Yeah.
Yes.
His ascension completely overturned centuries of social hierarchy.
A huge deal.
That's a wild turn of events if this Cwezi cult was so powerful.
Yeah.
How could Bukuku, a gate man, just like overthrow it so easily?
That's a good question.
What does this tell us about the state of Kitara at the time?
Well, it suggests that maybe the cult's grip on power wasn't as strong as it seemed.
Okay.
Maybe there were internal divisions we don't know about.
Yeah.
Or maybe Bukuku was just a really skilled strategist
Right.
who was able to get the commoners on his side against the elite.
Interesting. So he had the people's support.
But it makes you think about all the factors that could have led to this shift in power.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have this outsider, this gate man,
Yeah.
rising to power, challenging this very foundation of Kitara's social structure.
It's a big upheaval.
It is. How did Koogere react to this?
Yeah, she did not just accept Bukuku's rule. No, she saw him as a threat to everything she'd built.
Right.
A usurper who needed to be removed.
Oh.
She rallied the Busongora warriors,
Okay.
the elite fighting force of Kitara,
Wow.
sent them to the capital to overthrow Bukuku and get back the royal stool.
The royal stool? What's that?
The royal stool, it was like the symbol of Kitara's monarchy.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is high stakes.
I see.
A battle for control.
Absolutely.
The old guard, represented by Koogere and the Busongora warriors,
Right.
versus this new disruptive force, Bukuku.
Yeah. Who won?
The pastoralists who controlled the oral history, they're silent about what happened.
Oh, interesting.
But we can kind of deduce a few things. Okay. Bukuku, he continued to rule Kitara,
Right.
and there weren't any more attempts to remove him.
So it sounds like Bukuku and his army of cultivators, they won.
It seems likely, doesn't
Who
it?
does? This gateman, this outsider,
Yeah.
manages to defeat the established power structure.
And hold on to the throne. That's incredible.
What happened to Kogere after all of that? Did she fade into obscurity?
Not Koogere. She was never one to back down. She refused to accept Bukuku's rule and led Busongora to secede from Kitara. And here's the amazing part. She declared herself Mukama of Busongora, which made her the first female monarch in East African history.
Wow, so even though she lost some ground, she ended up creating her own kingdom
Yeah.
and becoming a queen in her own right.
It really shows how resilient and ambitious she was.
That's incredible. But her political power may have shifted, but her spiritual and cultural influence lasted, at least for a time.
Worth the time. Yeah.
What happened? Did a new rival show up?
Well, the arrival of Christianity in the 1800s had a huge impact on the region. It brought in a whole new belief system, one that appealed to many people, especially those who had been marginalized.
So are you saying Christianity was a direct challenge to Kogere's power?
In some ways, yes. Christianity provided a different path, a different worldview. For those who had been oppressed under the caste system, it offered a message of equality and hope. And it's important to remember that the success of Christianity wasn't just about religious conversion. It was also about social and economic factors that made this new faith attractive.
That's a really interesting perspective. So even though Kogere's reign was full of political maneuvering, religious influence, and even rebellion, it was ultimately a new wave of religious thought that changed the region. It was huge. Christianity completely changed things. Its emphasis on the sanctity of human life and, a different understanding of God.
Right.
It challenged everything the Cwezi cult stood for.
Yeah, like divination, the caste system, those core practices that had defined Kitara for so long.
Exactly.
That must have caused quite a stir. Did everyone just accept these new ideas?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
The pastoralists, they'd benefited from the Cwezi system for centuries.
Right.
Change wasn't exactly welcome.
Yeah, makes sense. But what about the commoners, those who had been marginalized under the caste system?
For them, Christianity was a message of liberation and equality.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just about religion then.
No, not at all.
It was about power, social dynamics. How did this clash of ideologies actually play out?
Well, Christianity became a catalyst for change. It empowered those who had been marginalized for so long.
Right.
Melody Hope suggests that the commoners were particularly drawn to the Christian concept of a loving God,
Okay.
which was a stark contrast to the fear-based control of the Cwezi cult.
Right. It's a reminder that these beliefs don't exist in a vacuum.
Absolutely not.
They're connected to social, political, economic forces.
Yeah.
It's all intertwined.
It is.
What a fascinating and complex period of history.
It is.
We've journeyed through ancient Kitara. We've met this incredible queen.
Yeah.
And it shows that individuals can really shape the course of events.
Absolutely.
It also reveals so much about ancient East Africa,
Right.
the importance of cattle, the power of spiritual belief.
It really makes you wonder. Was she a product of her time, skillfully working a system that already existed? Or was she a trailblazer, bending the rules and making her own path?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is probably somewhere in between.
Okay.
Koogere was definitely ambitious and knew how to navigate the complexities of power. She used what she had, the Cwezi cult, her family, even her gender, to her advantage, but she also faced obstacles like the rebellious Isarzar and the commoner king Bukuku.
Right. Her story really shows that power is never absolute. It's always being negotiated, challenged, and redefined. We see how a seemingly solid system, like the Cwezi caste system, can be overturned by someone like Bukuku, who was willing to challenge the status quo. And then Christianity arrives, bringing a whole new set of beliefs and values that reshape the power dynamics of the region.
Exactly. And it's not just about who's in charge, but also how they justify their power. Koogere and the Cwezi used religious beliefs and physical differences to make their authority seem legitimate. But then Christianity comes along, offering a different perspective, one that emphasizes equality and the value of every person.